Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Tonight the program will focus on two major foreign policy developments, both of which are critical to India's interests. In part 2, we shall discuss the visit of Sri Lanka's President Maithripala Sirisena. Does it herald a fresh start in Delhi's relations with Colombo? And can the problems that have bedeviled the past be quickly and satisfactorily resolved? But first, the possibility that India and Pakistan could be on the brink of a rapprochement. When Prime Minister Modi rang up Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to wish Pakistan good luck in the Cricket World Cup and then announced that India's Foreign Secretary would undertake a SAARC yatra starting in Islamabad, it was clear that the two governments are trying to resume dialogue. Now, the Indian Express reports that this goes back to a secret meeting at the SAARC retreat in Nepal in November. So in part 1, we ask, is a new chapter in India-Pakistan relations about to open? And now joining me to discuss the possibility of a new dawn in India-Pakistan relations is India's former High Commissioner to Pakistan, Satyabrat Pal, the editor of the Pakistani newspaper Friday Times and former Chief Minister of Pakistan's Punjab province, Najm Sethi, the assistant editor of the Indian Express, Shubhajit Roy, and the former editor of The Hindu and a stalwart of the India-Pakistan Track 2 dialogue, Siddharth Vardarajan. Satyabrat Pal, last week when the Prime Minister telephoned his Pakistani counterpart to wish him good luck for the Cricket World Cup and then announced that the Foreign Secretary will go on a SAARC yatra and Islamabad will be his first stop, many believed that this was in fact a cover, an adroit cover perhaps, for resuming the dialogue that had been stalled since last year. Do you share that belief?
Perhaps it was, but irrespective of the fact that it was done very cleverly to get out of a very sticky corner, the fact that the Prime Minister took this initiative is a very welcome step, and I hope that we now build on it.
But the interesting thing is you do at least believe that this is a very clever, adroit way of getting out of what was a rather messy situation that he'd got himself into.
Yes, yes. One admires the adroitness, as you put it. He had tied himself into knots, and like a Houdini, he's got out of it.
Najm Sethi, the news took everyone by surprise in India when it was announced. How was it received in Pakistan, and do Pakistanis share the interpretation that at least Mr. Pal believes that in fact this was an adroit and clever way of getting the Indian Prime Minister out of a rather messy situation he'd got himself into when he called off the Foreign Secretary level talks because your High Commissioner had spoken to Hurriyat?
Well, you know, many people in Pakistan thought that that your Prime Minister was true to his colours. People in Pakistan had forecast a hardline position, and my own view is slightly different. I felt that, and part of it was coloured by my understanding of Nawaz Sharif, our Prime Minister, was that this was a temporary setback and that it could not have happened without institutional backing. And the question was, why did he do it? Because the pretext on which the talks were called off was very flimsy. I could not imagine that this would last for long. The only explanation at that time was he was going in for an election in Kashmir and he probably wanted to send a hardline signal, and that he would come back to it as soon as the elections were over. And I really don't think he's trying to get out of a sticky situation. My sense is that it was planned from day one. In fact, it was a pretty smart, clever way of moving ahead, first trying to pretend that he was moving back and then moving ahead.
So you're also applauding the Indian Prime Minister, but not for the adroitness with which he's got out of a sticky situation. You're actually applauding him for devising a strategy which allowed him to appear like a hardliner in the Indian Kashmir elections, from which he benefited, and then find an effective way to get off that hook and resume a dialogue, which he always wanted to do, but he had to get over the Kashmir hump.
Yes, I think it's inconceivable that when he took this step of calling off the talks, he didn't know how that he didn't know how he would get back on it, because the ball was always in his court. So there are so many ways of getting back on track. So they must have reasoned, no problem, we'll get back on track. It's easy.
But you're really seriously saying that in your eyes this was planned from August and it was intended that it would go this way?
Yes, I think so.
All right. Some may say that you're giving politicians more credit and more deftness than they deserve.
No, I think that, you know, just to answer that question, I think your politics, foreign policy is far more institutionalized in terms of South Bloc than ours is. So therefore, your Prime Minister could not have been misguided or misled. South Bloc would have had a very important say in this, and they would have known, yes, the politics of it, if that's what you want, we can get back on track.
Shubhajit, what you are hearing from Najam Sethi is that the Indian Prime Minister couldn't have conceivably made a mistake, therefore he must have intended to do what he did and let it look as if he was being a hardliner at one point of time so that he could then back off later on and resume the dialogue. Now, writing on the front page of your paper, The Indian Express, yesterday, Sunday, you had an amazing front page scoop actually, that this rapprochement goes back to a secret 15-minute meeting between the two prime ministers at the SAARC retreat in Nepal in November. Share with us what more you know about that meeting.
You know, this meeting took place over a span of about an hour and a half that they spent with the 8 leaders at the SAARC summit just outside the resort. And at Dhulikhel, they got about 15 minutes in which one broad agreement was there between the two leaders, and that was that there is no point in remaining disengaged. I mean, there's no merit in remaining disengaged, and both had their ideas, but both disagreed on how to move forward. But one thing, after the 15-minute meeting, which was sort of, goaded by other leaders as well, in fact, the Nepalese Prime Minister was on record in saying that, I facilitated a meeting between the two prime ministers. Whether that's true or not, but these two leaders took time out and they agreed that let us wait for some time before the political space emerges. The unstated reason in that was, of course, as Mr. Najam Sethi just pointed out, that the Jammu and Kashmir elections were ongoing, and just after it got over, they would have an opportunity.
So in a real sense, in fact, this understanding, let's give ourselves time, but let's resume the dialogue eventually, echoes what Najam Sethi has said, that they wanted to find a sensible way of getting over what I call the Kashmir hump.
Absolutely, and that is where this issue of how and when to meet the Kashmiri Hurriyat leaders is important. The sequencing issue that I pointed out.
Absolutely. I'll come to that sequencing issue in a moment's time, but I want to stick for a while, Siddharth Varadarajan, with the telling meetings that the two sides have actually had with each other, because after that secret SAARC contact that Shubhajit wrote about as a great revelation yesterday, there were a series of other contacts between the two governments. First, there was Mr. Modi's phone call to Mr. Sharif after the dreadful terrorist attack in Peshawar in December. Then there was Ajit Doval's visit to the Pakistan High Commissioner and that very important message he left behind in their visitor's book. And then third, as Shubhajit points out, there have been several under the radar meetings at a high level over the past few months. Do you get the feeling that quietly, possibly even half subterraneously, the two sides have been finding a way of sorting out their differences and resuming the dialogue, while the rest of us were perhaps not even aware of it?
It's always been my belief that calling off the dialogue in the way that it was done was I mean, that position was not tenable, and that Mr. Modi, whatever the reasons were, I don't agree with Najam that there was some well thought out plan. I think it was a product of the Mr. Modi's inexperience, quite frankly, and the fact that the foreign policy decision making process, the institutional machinery which had received a jolt after the election, you had officers who were either not being consulted or were finding their feet, yet to establish a comfortable relationship with Mr. Modi. So you had all this kind of lack of synchronization within the government of India, which produced that disastrous cancellation of talks. But it was clear to me that Mr. Modi would always have to find a way to come back. I think the way they've handled this is very good. I suspect that Mr. Jaishankar coming as Foreign Secretary and the fact that he has an excellent rapport with the Prime Minister would have played a not inconsiderable role in the Prime Minister's decision to push ahead at this moment. Plus, of course, the fact that you've had the J&K elections, there's government formation discussions at an advanced stage, and talks with Pakistan clearly will give a fillip to the PDP's efforts to somehow sell to Valley public opinion its impending partnership with the BJP. So all told, this is a clever move.
Absolutely, but you now veer back to what I had suggested at the beginning, which Najam Sethi didn't agree with, that this is a droit but it's a droid not because it was a cleverly pre-planned strategy that's worked out. It's a droid because it gets the Indian Prime Minister out of a sticky situation of his own making.
Absolutely.
Let's pursue the thought of the sequencing, which is a critical part of Shubhajit Roy's article. The article reveals that perhaps most importantly of all, India and Pakistan have agreed to sequence the Pakistan High Commissioner's future meetings with Hurriyat leaders. The paper says that he will be free or able to meet Hurriyat leaders on Pakistan's National Day as well as any other time of the year, but not immediately before talks between the two governments. Assuming that sequencing is true and the governments accept it, what do you make of it as a former High Commissioner to Pakistan?
Well, in the period that I was there, and for a few years before that, we had no issues with the Pakistani High Commissioner meeting the Hurriyat or anyone else in India, quite frankly. If such an agreement has been reached, it remains to be seen if the government of Pakistan can actually go through with it, because since it was so visibly the stumbling block, and the government of Pakistan had then taken the stand that this has been the case in the past, that the High Commissioner has met the Hurriyat before every
Can I
important
interrupt
talk.
there? You're questioning whether the government of Pakistan can accept this sequencing, but actually what the sequencing does is to permit the Pakistan High Commissioner to meet Hurriyat at any time of the year except immediately before.
But that was precisely the point.
But do you remember what Sardar Aziz in New York said to Headlines Today, and he said it to other channels as well subsequently, that in fact maybe the timing of the meeting was wrong. If he can concede that, then what he's suggesting is a meeting immediately before talks with the government is the wrong time. Meet them after the talks, meet them substantially before the talks, but get the timing a bit better tuned. Now, doesn't that suggest that Sardar Aziz will have no real problem?
As I said, it would depend very much on how the government of Pakistan interprets this business of just before.
Okay. Let me put that to you. How will the government of Pakistan interpret this sequencing, and in particular this condition, don't meet Hurriyat just before talks?
I think they'll have no problems with it. You are absolutely right. Sartaj Aziz made that statement, and I can tell you in a private conversation with him, he actually said that this is the only way out. It's not going to be a big problem. We're going to get back on track. I can now say that because I've been privy to this. And the reason why I say that part of it was pre-planned on this side, to answer my friend Siddharth's reasoning, is that, you know, if you want to take a hard line, you always know that you have the initiative. You can always find ways and means of getting back on track. And you know SAARC is coming up. You know institutionally that the Pakistanis have already conveyed to you that we didn't sign the trade agreement with the last government because we wanted to sign it with you, because although it's a win-win situation for both countries, it's more win for India than it is for Pakistan. And since 1965...
So let the kudos go to Mr. Modi,
right,
who we have to deal with for 5 years more.
And this has been conveyed to Mr. Modi, and he's appreciative of it.
So you're saying two things which are important. First of all, you're saying to me that in fact the sequencing, which Shotopal was a little doubtful Pakistan would accept, you're saying it will be no problem for Pakistan.
No problem at all.
The second thing I want to put to you is this. To many in India, this sequencing once again suggests that a way has been found for Mr. Modi to climb down from his original rigid position, because his original position seemed to be, I would not want them to talk to Hurriyat, full stop, not that there are certain times when they can, certain times when they can't. This is a way of climbing down from that rigidity.
Yes, I wouldn't even say it's climbing down. I think it's just a way out of a situation that was deliberately created. It was never an important situation. They knew how to get out.
You're not going to say to me that Mr. Modi had planned this as well in advance?
No, because you see, the thing is that if I'd been sitting in South Block, I would have told the Prime Minister, you want to get out of this situation for political reasons? No problem, sir. We'll get you back on track. This is very important. We know how ways and means of doing it. There are back channels that are all met, and then you'll be meeting the Pakistanis at this forum and at that forum. We can always go back to it. This trade thing is important. It's important for you. It's important for India. It's important.
So we have to get back on track so that we can realize trade.
Yeah.
Let me come back to that question, because I think it's a key question. Was this something that in fact was pre-planned and pre-thought out and therefore understood by the Pakistanis, or was it something that Mr. Modi has to find a way of cleverly, perhaps, climbing down from? And the point is this: when he originally objected to the Pakistan High Commissioner meeting Hurriyat and said that this is not acceptable, he was A, asking Pakistan to reverse a 2-decade-old tradition, and B, he was also in effect asking them to give up what is their policy. Now, Pakistan could give up their policy as a result of a consequence of talks, but not as a precondition for talks. So I put it again to you. Do you think this is a clever way of helping Mr. Modi climb down from a rigidity where he'd boxed himself into a corner without intending to do so?
Yeah, I think at this level we have to see two things. One is the personal level at which he is trying to reach out to Pakistan at each occasion, right from swearing-in ceremony. Even after the cancellation of the Foreign Secretary level talks, he reached out to Pakistan on Kashmir floods. Even after so much of bitterness between the two sides, and after these two leaders, Prime Minister Modi and Nawaz Sharif, they both met. After that, when the Peshawar attack took place, he seized the opportunity to make that phone call. He could have just simply written a letter. Yes.
Were all these opportunities that he was seizing to try and get off a hook that he'd got onto, or was this part of a pre-planned strategy?
I think so. Post August 18th, after these talks were cancelled, I think he would have got a feedback that he was in a box. So he wanted to get out of the situation. So his phone calls, his letters offering help on floods were all part of a carefully crafted effort to reverse his position.
This is a very interesting situation we have, and I'll point it out for the audience. The three Indians on my panel all believe that Mr. Modi has been finding clever and adroit ways to get himself out of a box that he'd got into without realizing. The one Pakistani we have is actually giving Mr. Modi enormous credit for having strategically planned this from the very beginning. Not that he made a mistake, but this was well thought out.
No, I just simply, my point is that they did it and they knew they would get out of it. They would find plenty of reasons.
So they knew it was cost-free.
Absolutely. They thought, okay, it's a small setback. We were not going to take people into confidence, but we'll get back on track. It's no big deal. One reason, and by the way, when this happened, in a day or two, I reasoned that they would have to get back on track. And I said so as much on my own television programs. And later when I met the Pakistani Prime Minister, and I tried to sort of quiz him to see how upset he was, and I suddenly realized that there was more going on, and that he was perhaps not as upset as he should be, and he knew he would get back on track.
So you had, in a sense, confirmation of your theory from Mr. Nawaz Sharif.
Not that he said anything to me, but when I said, aren't you very upset and all the rest of it, and he sort of shrugged and he said, oh, I suppose we'll get back on track sooner or later.
This leads me to the conclusion that politicians are wily old people.
Yes,
there's more
absolutely.
to them than meets the eye. Siddharth Varadarajan, another element of that Indian Express article is that, in fact, the paper says that there is fresh thinking between both countries on how to structure the talks henceforth. Do you, as an independent observer, believe that both countries now want to move beyond the composite dialogue structure and to find a new architecture, so to speak?
As far as I know, quite frankly, there is little appetite for a complete going back to the drawing board and coming up with something new, brand new. I think it would be important for the two foreign secretaries to review where the composite dialogue has gone so far, and any decision about abandoning that framework, going for a new framework, would have to be based on that sort of review, which hasn't happened. And we know for a fact that India-Pakistan talks at the official level have not broached this subject. I don't think there's agreement even on the Indian side that the composite dialogue format has run its course, quite frankly. So I think that that's perhaps some speculation. There's a lot of, there are people on the track 2 side who, particularly in India, want the composite dialogue format to be changed for something else. But I don't think this is a big issue. At the end of the day, Kashmir, peace and security, Siachen, trade, there are a finite number of topics that the two sides are committed to talking about. You can maybe graft on new subjects like Afghanistan. I think it's important
it's not
that
the grafting out of new subjects I'm talking about. Let me stop you there. It's not the grafting on of new subjects, it's the structuring of the talks. How confident are you, Shubhajit, because it's your article that suggests the two governments are looking for new architecture. How confident are you that they actually are?
When Sujata Singh, the former foreign secretary, was going to Islamabad in August, the meeting was about talking about talks. Essentially, it was a process-centric a conversation that she was going to have in that particular meeting. That is exactly what Mr. Jaishankar, when he travels to Islamabad in a few months or few weeks from now, would be having how to...
Can I interrupt that?
Yes.
When he goes and he has what you call a process-centric dialogue, will he in fact be starting the talk about talks, or will he be concluding a process of talking about talks where they've now already decided what the talk should be hereafter? So is it the start of that process-centric thing, or is it the conclusion?
I would believe it would be a conclusion about that process, because it
would be the conclusion.
Yes.
So a lot of that has already been done behind the scenes.
Exactly, my point.
Where does India stand on this question of the utility of the composite dialogue? And I'll put the same question in a moment's time to Najam Sethi. You've been High Commissioner. You know how the Indian bureaucracy, the Indian government, regardless of whether it's Mr. Modi or his predecessor, view this composite structure. Are we happy with it, or do we think it needs to change?
You know, the composite dialogue is India's baby. Pakistan wanted no truck with it. Pakistan simply wanted to discuss Kashmir. We were the ones who said that, look, between two neighbors, you simply cannot discuss one particular issue. Therefore, look at the whole raft of issues that are common problems.
So now that we got them to agree to something that they weren't initially willing to do we want to change the architecture?
That is precisely my question. Whether we call it the composite dialogue or give it some other name, eventually we'll have to discuss this whole range of issues.
Quite right. The range of issues have to be discussed. The question really is at what level and who does the discussing. Najam Sethi, when Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif was here in May for Mr. Modi's swearing in, he said to me, and now I too am free to say it publicly, that he would like the subjects of Kashmir and terror raised to a higher level of dialogue, possibly even the political level, but certainly at least the NSA level, and not handled at the Foreign Secretary level hereafter. Is that the sort of new architecture Pakistan is thinking of?
Yeah, you know, the thing is, this composite dialogue thing is out now. Composite dialogue means there are 8 subjects, you have 8 baskets, and you're talking about them simultaneously. It doesn't matter what progress is taking place, but you're talking about them simultaneously at a high level. I think that's out now. Sartaj Aziz has already said, as you just said, that they're talking about a new strategic way of defining the talks. So it won't be simultaneous. I think you're absolutely right. You have to look out for trade to begin. That's going to be item number 1 on the agenda.
Not Kashmir and not terror.
First, trade. That will, because that's done. It was a signed and done deal before your elections. The only reason it wasn't done was because Nawaz Sharif thought, okay, let's do it with the next government. And they knew which government was coming in.
This also fits in with the business-oriented thinking of both Prime Ministers.
Absolutely. So I think you need to wait to see when the back channel is activated. When both sides nominate their back channels, then you will see that both terrorism and Kashmir will be on the back channel, and the other issues will be part of an ongoing dialogue.
You're saying something very interesting. You're saying item number 1 will be trade, which it never was. Kashmir and terror could move to the back channel,
yes,
so that it's discussed more intensively, but without the glare of the media.
Absolutely.
And the others could carry on being handled at the Foreign Secretary level.
Yes.
So, assuming that what Najam Sethi says actually happens, is that a clever way of finessing the two countries' particularly difficult, sticky problems with Kashmir and terror? Move them to the back channel, have intensive dialogue and discussion there, so that it's out of the media glare. Hopefully, you can actually make progress because you're doing it more quietly.
Well, we all know that this is what happened in the past, right? I mean, when the Manmohan-Musharraf process was underway and you had Tariq Aziz and Ambassador Lamba meeting and coming up with a framework solution, if reports are to be believed, for J&K, much greater movement was made in those 7 or 8 sessions that they had than 40 years of foreign secretaries talking to each other about J&K. So yes, of course, a political level, a politically empowered back-channel dialogue is essential. But we don't know as of now to what extent would Nawaz Sharif be willing to commit to that Musharraf-Manmohan formula. Nor do we know, for that matter, that the BJP government of Narendra Modi would be willing to embrace that.
Can I stop you there? We've got Najam Sethi, who's had conversations with Nawaz Sharif. Would Nawaz Sharif be willing to commit to the Manmohan-Musharraf formula, or would he say, discuss Kashmir on the back channel, but let's evolve our own new formula?
I think the Pakistani Prime Minister's gone on record in Pakistan, certainly to say, well, Musharraf usurped my view on how to go forward on Kashmir.
In other words, it's not agreeing with Musharraf, Musharraf agrees with him.
He said Musharraf did Kargil, I wanted to do the Chenab formula and the other things, the long-term Kashmir settlement, and then Musharraf went around and to 5 years
So in other words, what you're saying, in a very clever and adroit way, Nawaz Sharif has embraced Musharraf by saying Musharraf was me anyway.
Yes.
What about our Prime Minister? Will Mr. Modi be happy to embrace the Manmohan-Musharraf formula? There's a lot else, by the way, that Mr. Modi's embraced that is Manmohan Singh's property. Would he embrace this as well?
I think he's been very intelligent to bring conversation with Pakistan under the rubric of SAARC. That is where he would sort of broach this, ideas from. Like when Foreign Secretary Jaishankar goes to Islamabad, the first part of the agenda that he will talk about is Mr. Modi's proposals on SAARC, say SAARC satellite or vaccines or medical visas.
And after the first half hour, he'll switch to Kashmir.
Whether he switches to Kashmir or not, but substantive bilateral issues will only figure after that, which would be...
But the point I'm asking is, when they get to the bilateral issues, do you think there is any inclination on Mr. Modi's part to embrace the Musharraf-Manmohan Singh back-channel formula on Kashmir? You've heard Najm Sethi say that in fact Nawaz Sharif will have no hesitation embracing it because he actually believes this is his formula, not Musharraf. Do you think Mr. Modi could do something similar and say, by the way, I have no problem? There's so much else that he's borrowed from Mr. Manmohan Singh. Can he not borrow this as well?
I mean, a lot will depend on what kind of inputs he gets from the Foreign Office and
Jaishankar in particular.
Exactly.
And Jaishankar knew Dr. Manmohan Singh well. Now I'm coming to a very interesting part of this, and I'm going to put it to you. Jaishankar was very close to Dr. Manmohan Singh. Dr. Manmohan Singh, it's no secret, wanted him as Foreign Secretary but couldn't get him. Now that Jaishankar is Foreign Secretary to a different Prime Minister, will Jaishankar find a way of convincing Mr. Modi, look, rather than reinvent the wheel, Musharraf and Manmohan left you a wheel. Embrace it, right? Knock in a nail or two, but essentially take that wheel and keep it.
I hope he does.
Do you think he will?
I can't speak for the Foreign Secretary.
What about a different question? How easy is it for a Foreign Secretary to convince a Prime Minister of this sort of thing?
It depends on the Foreign Secretary, depends on the Prime Minister, and it depends on the issue at hand.
This is a Foreign Secretary who may have found a clever way of getting Mr. Modi off the hook. The hook being calling off dialogue with Pakistan. He's devised a clever, adroit way of making it look as if there's no climb down, even if there is. Do you think he could find an equally adroit and clever way of convincing him, accept this wheel, don't reinvent it when you don't need to?
I think all the Foreign Secretary will need to do is to present to the Prime Minister, if he hasn't read it already, the outcome of what was discussed and negotiated between Tariq Aziz and Sati Lamba, which Mr. Nawaz Sharif has seen, and I presume by now Mr. Modi has seen as well. And I think having seen that, they would both agree that this is the best deal either country can get.
Let me put it like this. The logic of what Mr. Modi discovers should be sufficient to convince him that it's best to continue with it.
He's clearly a highly intelligent man. I don't think he will need persuasion.
What is your view as a Pakistani who has always wanted to promote India-Pakistan relations of the future? Do you believe we are really seeing the beginning of a rapprochement, which is how I introduced the story, or am I over-egging the pudding?
No, I think it's not going to happen overnight. It's not as though tomorrow the back channel will be activated and Kashmir will become part of it and terrorism. I think this will take time. I think both sides will hammer in some new nails into the old formulas. The situation has changed. The Kashmir situation in particular, the new pending alliance between the BJP and the PDP, that will have a bearing on the new Kashmir formula as well, how both sides have to move forward. I think one of the conditions that Mr. Mufti is putting up is that you need to talk to the Pakistanis and find a...
And you need to talk to Hurriyat too.
And you need to talk to Hurriyat
But all of that is pressure that will push our Prime Minister in the right direction, if I could so phrase it. Yeah.